The KRYL council chamber hummed with a low, resonant energy, a symphony of subtle power only discernible to their acutely tuned senses. Light, filtered through shimmering crystalline structures, bathed the assembly in an ethereal glow, illuminating the faces of the KRYL elders. Each was a study in serene composure, their features sculpted by centuries of genetic refinement, their eyes reflecting an intelligence both profound and disturbingly detached. They were the architects of their world, the custodians of its dwindling future. The KRYL were a species on the precipice of extinction, generations of sterile reproduction, a consequence of their own genetic manipulations to achieve a perfect society, had left them unable to naturally procreate. Their once vibrant civilization was now a carefully curated museum, a testament to a glorious past that threatened to become nothing more than a memory. The solution, proposed by the leading geneticists within the council, was radical, genetic, infusion from an outside source. Years of clandestine observation of other sentient species had led them to a single, unsettling conclusion. Humanity, humans with their messy, unpredictable genetic code, possessed a resilience and adaptability that the KRYL had long since sacrificed. That IT was a gamble, a desperate attempt to reignite the spark of life within their sterile society. The decision to abduct a human was not taken lightly. It was a violation of galactic law, a moral transgression that weighed heavily on some members of the council. But the survival of their species, they argued, outweighed the ethical considerations. They justified their actions as a necessary evil, a desperate measure to avert their inevitable demise. The chosen subject, a human male known as Captain Alex Ryder, was deemed genetically suitable. His abduction was swift and clinical, executed with the precision and efficiency that defined the KRYL. Now, he was but a pawn in their grand, desperate game. The fate of the KRYL, and perhaps even Alex himself, rested on the outcome of their experiments. Alex awoke to a blinding white light and a throbbing ache in his head. Disorientation clung to him like a shroud, blurring the edges of his awareness. He was strapped to a cold, metallic table, his limbs immobilized by restraints that hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy. The air was sterile, devoid of any scent save for a faint, antiseptic tang that stung his nostrils. Gone was the familiar comforting scent of ozone from the cockpit of his ship, replaced by nothing. Panic clawed at his throat. He strained against the restraints, the metal biting into his skin. Where was he? What had happened? The last thing he remembered was the sudden surge of energy, the blinding flash that engulfed his ship as he charted a new nebula. Then, nothing. He tried to focus, to regain control, that he was a pilot, a captain, a man trained to face the unknown. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. That he scanned the room, his eyes darting from one smooth, featureless wall to another. There were no windows, no doors, only the cold, sterile surfaces and the faint hum of machinery. The very architecture seemed alien, designed for beings unlike himself. Then they appeared, silhouettes at first, gliding into the room with an unnerving grace. As they drew closer, their forms resolved into the KRYL. Tall and slender, their skin a pale, almost translucent blue, their eyes large and black, devoid of pupils. Their expressions were unreadable, masks of cold, clinical curiosity. He struggled against the restraints again, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, his voice hoarse and strained. The KRYL did not respond. They simply observed him, their eyes scanning his body with a detached, analytical gaze. One of them approached the table, a slender hand reaching out towards him. He flinched, recoiling against the restraints. This was it, he thought. This was the end. He braced himself for whatever was to come, determined to resist, to fight back in any way he could, even if it meant dying on this cold, alien table. His fight for survival had begun. The experiments began without warning, without explanation. One moment, Alex was staring into the impassive faces of his captors. The next, a sharp, searing pain ripped through his arm. He cried out, The sound swallowed by the sterile environment, he thrashed against the restraints, his muscles burning with exertion. But it was futile. He was completely helpless. A beam of emerald light lanced down from an overhead device. Focusing on his forearm, he could feel the energy burning into his flesh, probing his veins, dissecting his very essence. The pain intensified, radiating outwards from the point of contact, consuming him in a wave of agony. He screamed again, a raw, primal sound of suffering. Through the haze of pain, he saw the KRYLL Council. They were positioned behind a transparent screen, their figures silhouetted against the soft glow of the chamber beyond. They watched him with cold indifference, their expressions betraying no emotion. They were scientists observing a specimen, detached from the pain and suffering they were inflicting. The experiments continued for what felt like an eternity. Samples were taken, fluids extracted, genetic material analyzed. Needles pierced his skin, injecting him with unknown substances that sent waves of nausea and dizziness crashing over him. His body was poked, prodded, and scanned, reduced to nothing more than a collection of biological data. At one point, they inserted a thin, flexible tube into his spine. The pain was excruciating, a searing hot poker twisting through his nervous system. He bit down on his lip, drawing blood, fighting to maintain consciousness that he could feel his mind fracturing, his sanity slipping away. The KRYLL Council observed it all, their faces unchanged. They spoke amongst themselves in their strange, melodic language, their voices devoid of empathy to them. He was not a sentient being, not a pilot, not a man. He was simply a resource, a means to an end. He was their last hope, their desperate gamble. As the experiments continued, Alex's fear gave way to a cold, burning rage that he would not break. He would not give them the satisfaction. He would endure, he would survive, he would find a way to escape this living hell and make them pay for what they were doing to him. The experiments were brutal, invasive, and dehumanizing, but they had inadvertently ignited a fire within him, a spark of defiance that would fuel his determination to live. Amidst the cold, clinical detachment of the KRYLL Council, a single spark of empathy flickered. Zill, a younger member of the council, found herself increasingly disturbed by the treatment of the human captive. While the other elders viewed Alex as a mere biological resource, Zill saw something more. A flicker of sentience, a spark of defiance in his eyes that resonated with a part of her she had long suppressed. She began to spend more time observing him, not through the sterile lens of scientific instrumentation, but with her own eyes. She watched him endure the agonizing experiments, his body writhing in pain, his spirit refusing to break. She saw the raw, untamed emotions that flickered across his face: fear, anger, and a desperate yearning for freedom. These emotions were foreign to Zill, alien to the carefully controlled environment of KRYLL society. The KRYLL valued logic and reason above all else, suppressing any emotion that might cloud their judgment. But Alex's suffering stirred something within her, a long-dormant empathy that she could no longer ignore. She questioned the purely scientific approach of her elders, challenging their detached perspective. "Are we not obligated to consider his suffering?" she asked during a council meeting, her voice barely a whisper. Her question was met with silence, followed by a dismissive wave from the lead geneticist. "His suffering is irrelevant," she stated coldly. "His genetic material is what matters. Sentimental attachments are a luxury we cannot afford." Zill felt a surge of anger, a feeling she had been taught to suppress. "But he is not merely genetic material," she argued, her voice rising slightly. "He is a sentient being. Doesn't he deserve some measure of respect?" Her words were met with disapproval. The council warned her against allowing her emotions to cloud her judgment. They reminded her of the importance of their mission, the survival of their species. But Zill could not shake the feeling that they were sacrificing their humanity in the name of survival. Driven by her growing empathy, Zill began to investigate Alex's background, accessing the data collected during his abduction. She learned about his life as a pilot, his courage and skill, his connections to family and friends. The more she learned, the more she questioned the council's actions. She saw him not as a specimen, but as a person, a man with a life worth saving. Her curiosity was quickly evolving into something far more dangerous: compassion. Driven by her burgeoning empathy, Zill took a daring step. She began to interact directly with Alex. Initially, her visits were framed as scientific inquiries, a way to gather more data about his physiological and psychological responses to the experiments. She would stand at the edge of his confinement chamber, her voice modulated through a translation device, asking him questions about his past, his memories, his emotions. Alex, wary and distrustful after weeks of brutal experimentation, was initially resistant. He met her questions with silence or with angry outbursts, accusing her of complicity in his suffering. But Zill persisted, her voice calm and measured, her eyes conveying a sincerity that slowly chipped away at his defenses. The language barrier was a significant hurdle. KRYLL vocalizations were far different from human speech, relying on subtle shifts in tone and resonance that were difficult for human ears to detect. But KRYLL technology was advanced, and the translation device allowed for a rudimentary, if imperfect, form of communication. As they spoke, Zill began to understand Alex's perspective, his hopes and fears, his love for his home planet, and his desire to return. She learned about Earth, about the beauty of its landscapes, the warmth of its sun, the complexity of its cultures. He, in turn, began to see her not as a cold, detached scientist, but as an individual grappling with her own internal conflicts. He noticed the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the flicker of sadness in her eyes when he spoke of his pain, the hesitant smile that played on her lips when he shared a fond memory. He began to trust her, to see her as an unlikely ally in his struggle for survival. Their conversations became more frequent, more personal. Zill would visit him during her off hours, sharing stories about KRYLL society, its history, its struggles. She revealed the truth about their dying race, their desperation to find a cure, their reliance on his genetic material. The more they talked, the closer they became. An unlikely connection formed between them, a bridge built across the vast chasm of species and culture. IT was a connection born of shared suffering, of mutual respect, and of a growing sense of understanding. Zill's scientific curiosity had blossomed into something far deeper, a genuine empathy, a profound sense of connection with the human she was supposed to be studying. She was falling in love. Zill's growing feelings for Alex were a dangerous transgression, a forbidden emotion in the rigid, emotionless society of the KRYLL. Love, compassion, empathy, these were considered weaknesses, vulnerabilities that threatened the carefully maintained order of their world. The council had spent generations eradicating such emotions, viewing them as primitive and irrational. She tried to suppress her feelings, to rationalize them as a mere byproduct of her scientific curiosity. But the truth was undeniable. She was falling in love with Alex, his strength, his resilience, his unwavering spirit. These qualities captivated her, awakening a part of her she never knew existed. Her internal conflict intensified. She was torn between her loyalty to her people and her growing affection for the human captive. The council's motives, once unquestioned, now seemed increasingly suspect. Was their desperation to survive truly justification for the suffering they were inflicting on Alex? Were they not becoming the very monsters they sought to avoid becoming? She began to question the ethical implications of their experiments, challenging the council's justification for their actions. Are we not sacrificing our own values in the name of survival? She asked during a council meeting, her voice trembling slightly. Are we truly preserving our civilization, or are we simply perpetuating a cycle of violence and exploitation? Her questions were met with resistance. The council accused her of sentimentality, of allowing her emotions to cloud her judgment. They reminded her of the sacrifices they had made to build their society, the importance of maintaining their emotional detachment. But Zill could no longer ignore the voice of her conscience. She saw the pain in Alex's eyes, the weariness in his face, the slow erosion of his spirit. She knew that she could not stand by and watch him suffer any longer. Her forbidden emotions were not merely a personal struggle. They were a catalyst for change, a spark of rebellion against the rigid conformity of KRYLL society. She realized that the survival of her people could not come at the cost of their humanity. Her love for Alex had opened her eyes to the injustices of the Council's methods, fueling her determination to challenge their authority and fight for what she believed was right. She knew that her actions could have dire consequences, that she risked being ostracized, even punished. But she was willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of Alex, and for the sake of her own conscience. The forbidden emotions had become her driving force. Driven by her love and guilt, Zil began to take small, surreptitious actions to ease Alex's suffering. During her visits, she would bring him small comforts: a softer blanket for his cot, nutrient paste that tasted slightly less synthetic, even a data pad containing images of Earth's landscapes and wildlife. These were meager offerings, but they were a lifeline for Alex, a tangible sign that someone cared about his well-being. More importantly, Zil began to provide Alex with information, carefully worded hints about the facility's layout, the security protocols, and the Council's long-term plans. She revealed the location of key access points, the blind spots in the surveillance system, and the emergency power overrides. She spoke in veiled terms, careful not to incriminate herself directly, but the message was clear. She was offering him a chance to escape. Alex, initially skeptical, began to trust her implicitly. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine concern in her voice, that he knew that she was risking everything to help him. And her courage inspired him. He devoured the information she provided, mentally mapping the facility, planning his escape. That he asked her why she was doing this, why she was willing to betray her own people. Zil hesitated, her eyes filled with conflict. "I cannot explain it," she said softly. "I only know that what they're doing is wrong, and I cannot stand by and watch it happen." She hinted at a possible escape route, a rarely used maintenance tunnel that led to the outer perimeter of the facility. That IT was a long shot, fraught with danger, but it was the only option they had. Alex's hope flickered to life. After weeks of despair and resignation, he finally saw a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. He began to exercise his muscles, preparing himself for the physical exertion of an escape attempt. He practiced manipulating the restraints, testing their weaknesses. He studied the KRYLL guards, analyzing their routines, searching for vulnerabilities. Zil became his lifeline, his confidant, his only ally in this alien world. He trusted her with his life, knowing that she was his only chance to escape this living hell. Their unlikely connection had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of empathy and compassion in the face of overwhelming adversity. The plan for escape was forming. Zil's clandestine activities did not go unnoticed for long. The Council, ever vigilant, had become suspicious of her frequent visits to Alex's confinement chamber. They initiated a discreet investigation, analyzing her communication logs, scrutinizing her movements, and monitoring her biometric readings. The evidence quickly mounted, revealing the extent of her involvement with the human captive. The discovery of Zil's betrayal sent shockwaves through the Council. They viewed her actions as a grave offense, a violation of their most sacred principles, her empathy for Alex was seen not as a virtue, but as a contamination, a dangerous deviation from the rational, emotionless ideals of KRYLL society. She has been compromised, the lead geneticist declared during an emergency council meeting. Her emotional attachment to the human has clouded her judgment, rendering her a threat to our mission. The council debated the appropriate course of action. Some argued for immediate confinement, believing that Zil's contamination could spread to other members of the council. Others advocated for a more measured approach, seeking to understand the root cause of her deviation and find a way to correct it. Ultimately, they agreed that Zil's actions posed a significant threat to their plans. Her empathy for the human could undermine their authority, incite dissent within the ranks, and even jeopardize the entire experiment. They could not allow her to continue aiding Alex. The council saw Zill's actions as a betrayal of everything they stood for. She had turned against her own people, siding with an alien species whose very existence threatened their survival. Her love for Alex was a dangerous anomaly, a symptom of a deeper flaw in her genetic makeup. They ordered her immediate surveillance, tightening security around Alex's confinement chamber and preparing contingency plans to neutralize any potential threat she might pose. They considered her not only a traitor, but a victim, infected by the messy, unpredictable emotions of humanity. Zill's actions had unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences. Her love for Alex had made her a pariah, a threat to the very civilization she had sworn to protect. The Council's discovery marked a turning point, a moment of irreversible escalation in the conflict between empathy and logic, between love and duty. The clock was ticking. Knowing that the Council was aware of her actions, Zill decided to confront them directly. She requested an emergency session, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence. She walked into the chamber, the familiar crystalline structures now feeling alien and hostile. The council members watched her with cold, calculating eyes. "I know you are aware of my interactions with the human," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I will not deny that I have aided him, that I have questioned your methods." The lead geneticist interrupted her, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have betrayed us, Zill. You have allowed your emotions to cloud your judgment. You have become a threat to our survival." Zill stood her ground. "I have not betrayed you," she retorted. "I have simply chosen to uphold my conscience that I cannot stand by and watch you torture an innocent being in the name of science." She argued passionately for Alex's humanity, reminding the council that he was not merely a biological resource, but a sentient being with his own thoughts, feelings, and dreams. She challenged their detached perspective, accusing them of sacrificing their own values in their desperate quest for survival. "We are not preserving our civilization," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are destroying it. We are becoming the very monsters we fear." She then revealed the potential dangers of their genetic manipulation, citing data that she had secretly analyzed. She warned them that their experiments could have unforeseen consequences, potentially unleashing a genetic catastrophe that could doom the entire KRYLL species. Her words were met with outrage and disbelief. The council accused her of spreading misinformation, of inciting panic, of betraying their trust. They demanded that she recant her statements, that she reaffirm her loyalty to the council, but Zill refused to back down. She stood her ground, her voice unwavering, her eyes burning with conviction. She had made her choice. She would not compromise her principles, even if it meant facing the wrath of the entire council. Her defiance was complete. She had chosen love and humanity over blind obedience. The die was cast. With her defiance now public, Zill knew she had no time to waste. The council would not hesitate to imprison her, or worse. She had to act quickly to save Alex and herself. Under the guise of a final scientific evaluation, Zill managed to gain access to Alex's confinement chamber. The guards, though wary, obeyed her orders, their programming overriding their suspicions. "It's time," she whispered to Alex, her eyes filled with urgency. "They know everything. We have to go now." Using a smuggled code key, Zill deactivated the restraints, freeing Alex from his metallic prison. That he was weak, his body still scarred from the experiments, but his eyes burned with determination. Together, they slipped out of the chamber, moving quickly and quietly through the sterile corridors. The alarm blared moments later, shattering the silence. KRYLL security forces flooded the facility, their movements precise and efficient. Zill, using her knowledge of the facility's layout, guided Alex through the maze of corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares, sticking to the less patrolled service tunnels. They were pursued relentlessly, the KRYLL guards closing in with each passing moment. Zill used her access codes to override security doors, creating temporary barriers to slow their pursuers. But she knew it was only a matter of time before they were caught. The maintenance tunnel was their only hope. IT was a dark, cramped space filled with pipes and wires, a far cry from the pristine environment of the main facility. They crawled through the tunnel, their bodies aching, their lungs burning, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Zill knew that by helping Alex escape, she was condemning herself as a traitor to her own people. She would be hunted, ostracized, and likely executed if captured. But she didn't regret her decision. She had chosen love and compassion over blind obedience, and she would face the consequences with courage. As they neared the end of the tunnel, they could hear the sounds of KRYL guards closing in. Their desperate escape had become a race against time, a desperate gamble for freedom against overwhelming odds. The fate of both Zill and Alex hung in the balance. Emerging from the maintenance tunnel, they found themselves in a dimly lit storage area, a chaotic jumble of discarded equipment and obsolete technology. That IT was a temporary respite, but they knew they couldn't stay there for long. The KRYL would be searching the perimeter, tightening their net around them. Remembering something Zill had told him, Alex began searching the area. "You said there was an old communications array here," he said, his voice hoarse from exertion. "Something about a distress beacon." Zill nodded, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. "It's buried beneath a pile of discarded power cells, but it's outdated, but might still work." Together, they frantically cleared the debris, their fingers raw and bleeding. Finally, they uncovered the device, a battered metal box with a single activation button. IT looked ancient, almost prehistoric compared to the sleek technology of the KRYL. Alex hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the button. Activating the beacon was a gamble. IT would alert Earth to his presence, but it would also alert the KRYL to his location. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. A faint hum filled the air, followed by a series of crackling static noises that he wasn't sure if it had worked, if the signal had even reached Earth. But he had to try. The alarm sirens intensified, their wailing growing louder, more insistent. The KRYL security forces were closing in. They had to move, and fast. The Council, upon learning of the activated distress beacon, intensified their efforts to recapture Alex and silence Zill. They knew that if Earth discovered their activities, it would mean the end of their civilization. "Seal off the perimeter," the lead geneticist ordered. "Prevent any communication with the outside world. Recapture the human and eliminate the traitor." The KRYL security forces mobilized, their ranks swelling, their determination unwavering. They were no longer simply trying to recapture an escaped prisoner. They were fighting to protect their very existence. The stakes had been raised. The hunt was on. For Alex and Zill, the glimmer of hope offered by the distress beacon was now overshadowed by the looming threat of capture and annihilation. Their desperate flight had become a desperate fight for survival. Just when their hopes seemed to dwindle, a deafening roar echoed through the facility. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the lights flickered ominously. Zill recognized the sound instantly. It was the unmistakable signature of human warship engines. The distress beacon had worked. Outside, a fleet of human warships descended upon the KRYL facility, their sleek, metallic hulls gleaming in the harsh light of the alien sun. They engaged the KRYL defense systems with overwhelming force, their weapons unleashing a barrage of energy, blasts that tore through the alien shields. The KRYL had underestimated humanity. They had studied their genetics, their biology, their culture, but they had failed to grasp the full extent of their technological prowess. Human weaponry was far more advanced than they had anticipated, surpassing their own in both power and sophistication. The KRYL defense systems, once considered impenetrable, crumbled under the relentless assault. Energy shields shattered, turrets exploded, and the facility itself began to buckle under the onslaught. Inside, Alex and Zill could feel the vibrations of the battle raging outside. They knew that their rescue had arrived, but they also knew that they were caught in the crossfire. The human warships were indiscriminately targeting anything that resembled KRYL technology, their primary objective being to eliminate the alien threat, not to rescue a single captive. "We have to find shelter," Zill shouted over the din of the battle. The humans won't be able to distinguish us from the KRYLL. They scrambled for cover, hiding behind overturned equipment, praying that they would not become collateral damage in the human assault. The facility shook violently as explosions ripped through the corridors, sending debris flying in all directions. The arrival of the human fleet was both a blessing and a curse. IT offered a glimmer of hope for escape, but it also brought with it a new and terrifying threat. The indiscriminate fury of a technologically superior force, intent on wiping out the KRYLL at any cost. Alex and Zill were trapped between two warring factions, their survival hanging precariously in the balance. The rescue had become a war zone. With the KRYLL defense systems decimated, the human fleet launched a ground assault, deploying heavily armored troops onto the surface of the alien world. The soldiers, clad in advanced combat suits, stormed the facility, their weapons blazing. They moved with ruthless efficiency, clearing each room, each corridor, each level with brutal precision. The KRYLL offered little resistance. Their security forces, trained for containment and control, were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the human troops. They fell quickly, their bodies dissolving into shimmering dust, their advanced technology proving useless against the relentless onslaught. The humans were unaware of Alex's presence within the facility. They had received a distress signal, but their primary objective was to eliminate the alien threat, to secure the facility, and to prevent any further contact with the KRYLL. They operated under the assumption that any living being within the facility was hostile, a threat to be neutralized. Inside the storage area, Alex and Zill huddled together, listening to the sounds of the human assault drawing closer. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the stench of burning metal filling their nostrils. They could hear the shouts of the human soldiers, their voices harsh and guttural, their language foreign and unintelligible. "We have to find a way to signal them," Alex shouted over the din of the battle. "They'll kill us if they find us like this." Zill shook her head. "It's too dangerous. They won't listen to... They'll shoot first and ask questions later." They were trapped, caught between the ruthless efficiency of the human troops and the crumbling remnants of the KRYLL civilization. Their only hope was to remain hidden, to avoid detection, and to pray that the humans would eventually realize that they were not the enemy. But as the sounds of the assault grew closer, their chances of survival dwindled. The human troops were closing in, their weapons trained, their fingers on the trigger. Alex and Zill braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation, their fate hanging precariously in the balance. The rescue mission had become a massacre. The human troops breached the storage area, their weapons raised, their faces grim and determined. They swept the room, their eyes scanning for any sign of hostile life. Alex and Zill, huddled behind a stack of crates, knew that their time was up. "Humans, we are not the enemy," Alex shouted, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I am Captain Alex Ryder, a human pilot. I was abducted by these aliens." His words were lost in the chaos of the assault. The human troops, their training ingrained, saw only two figures amidst the alien wreckage: a human male, weakened and disheveled, and a KRYLL female, her blue skin and black eyes marking her as an enemy. "Clear," one of the soldiers shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. A volley of energy blasts ripped through the storage area, tearing apart the crates, sending sparks flying. Alex and Zill dove for cover, narrowly avoiding the deadly projectiles. They were caught in the crossfire, their bodies battered and bruised. "Damn it! I told you, we're not the enemy!" Alex screamed, his voice filled with desperation. But the human troops showed no mercy. They continued their assault, their weapons firing relentlessly. They saw all KRYLL as enemies, a hostile species that needed to be eradicated. They were not interested in explanations, in justifications, in pleas for mercy. Their mission was clear: to eliminate the alien threat and to secure the facility for humanity. Zill, seeing the futility of their situation, grabbed Alex's hand and pulled him towards a nearby escape hatch. "We have to get out of here," she shouted. "They won't listen to us." They scrambled through the hatch, plunging into a dark, narrow tunnel, the sounds of the human assault echoing behind them. They were running for their lives, pursued by the very people who had come to rescue them. The brutal reality of the situation was sinking in. They were on their own, hunted by both the KRYLL and the humans, their survival hanging by a thread. The rescue had become a nightmare. They stumbled through the narrow tunnel, their bodies bruised and battered, the sounds of the human assault growing fainter behind them. But their respite was short-lived. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and as they emerged, they were met with a hail of energy fire. Human troops were waiting for them, their weapons trained, their faces devoid of emotion. They had anticipated the escape route, and they were ready. Alex and Zil dove for cover, but it was too late. An energy blast struck the wall beside them, sending shards of metal flying. Alex felt a searing pain in his side, and he cried out in agony. Zil, seeing the danger, reacted instantly. She knew that they couldn't outrun the human troops, that their only chance was to create a diversion, to give Alex a chance to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged in front of Alex. Shielding him from the incoming fire, a volley of energy blasts slammed into her body, tearing through her flesh, burning her skin. She screamed in pain, her body convulsing violently. Alex watched in horror as Zil collapsed to the ground, her eyes wide. With shock and disbelief, he reached out to her, his hands trembling, his voice choked with emotion. "Zil, no, what have you done?" Zil looked up at him, her eyes filled with love and sorrow. "I had to save you, Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to live. You have to tell them what happened here." Another energy blast struck her, and her body went limp. Her eyes closed, and her breathing stopped. Zil, the KRYL council member who had dared to defy her own people, who had dared to love a human, was dead. Alex cradled her lifeless body in his arms, tears streaming down his face. He had lost his only ally, his only friend, his only loved. He had been rescued, but at a terrible price. The human troops, seeing that the KRYL female was dead, turned their attention to Alex. They approached him cautiously, their weapons still raised. They were no longer shooting, but their faces remained impassive, their intentions unclear. Alex knew that his life was still in danger. But in that moment, all he cared about was Zil. Her sacrifice had saved his life, but it had also shattered his heart. The brutal rescue had claimed its ultimate victim. The human troops, their weapons still trained on him, cautiously approached Alex, but he surrendered, his arms outstretched, his voice filled. With grief and exhaustion, he tried to explain the situation, to tell them about Zil, about her sacrifice, about the KRYL's plight. "She saved my life," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "She was trying to help me." They weren't all bad, but the human troops remained unmoved. They had seen the alien technology, the sterile environment, the signs of genetic experimentation. They had witnessed the KRYL's advanced weaponry and their unwavering resistance. They had made up their minds. "Secure the prisoner," the squad leader ordered, his voice cold and emotionless. "And clear the area, that we can't leave any alien tech behind." They dragged Alex away from Zil's lifeless body, ignoring his protests, his pleas for them to show some respect. They treated him not as a rescued captive, but as a contaminated subject, a potential threat to be contained and studied. He was taken to a decontamination chamber, stripped naked, and scrubbed raw with harsh chemicals. He was interrogated, questioned relentlessly about his abduction, his captivity, his interactions with the KRYL. He tried to explain Zil's role, her compassion, her sacrifice, but his words fell on deaf ears. The humans dismissed the KRYL as a hostile alien threat, a species that had posed a danger to humanity and needed to be eradicated. They saw no nuance, no complexity, no shades of gray. They viewed the situation in black and white, good versus evil, humans versus aliens. "They abducted you, Captain," one of the interrogators said, his voice stern and unforgiving. "They experimented on you, tortured you. They are our enemies, and we have eliminated them." Alex tried to argue, to explain that not all the KRYL were evil. that Zil had been different, that she had shown him kindness and compassion. But the humans refused to listen. They had their narrative, their truth, and they were not interested in hearing anything that contradicted it. The devastation of Zil's death was compounded by the realization that her sacrifice and the truth of her actions would never be acknowledged. She would be remembered, if at all, as one of the enemy. After weeks of debriefing and medical evaluations, Alex was finally allowed to return to Earth. He was hailed as a hero, a survivor of alien abduction, a testament to human resilience. He was paraded before the media, celebrated by the military, and showered with accolades. But beneath the surface of the triumphant narrative, Alex was a broken man. He was haunted by his experiences, by the memories of the experiments, the pain, the fear, and the loss. He could not forget Zil, her kindness, her compassion, her sacrifice. That he tried to tell his story, to share the truth about the KRYLL, to explain the complexities of the situation, to honor Zil's memory. But no one wanted to hear it. The world had already embraced a simpler narrative: humans versus aliens, good versus evil. His attempts to humanize the KRYLL were met with skepticism, with hostility, with accusations of Stockholm Syndrome. People didn't want to hear about Zil's love, her compassion, her defiance. They wanted to believe in the righteous victory of humanity, in the eradication of a dangerous alien threat. Alex carried the burden of knowing the truth, a truth that was lost in the triumphalism of human victory. He knew that the KRYLL had been a dying race, driven to desperate measures by their own biological crisis. That he knew that Zil had been a good person, a brave and compassionate soul who had sacrificed everything for him. He returned to his old life, his old routines, but nothing felt the same. The world seemed smaller, more cynical, more divided. That he saw the same prejudices, the same fears, the same willingness to demonize the other that had led to the KRYLL's downfall. He carried the memory of Zil with him, a constant reminder of the complexities of a universe, of the potential for love and compassion even in the face of overwhelming adversity. He knew that her sacrifice had not been in vain, that her memory would live on, not in the history books, not in the public consciousness, but in his heart. He would carry her truth, the truth that was lost in the narrative of human victory, until his dying day. His return to Earth was not a homecoming, but a sentence.